This is Branden with Extreme Networks. We're rebuilding my home lab. In the previous videos, we were setting up VMware and spinning up our VMs. Um, so now we're going to start with building Extreme Management Center, XMC. I like to start here typically because the setup time takes a little bit longer um, in the installation of Extreme Management. So we can let it work on that while we set up the other VMs. So I'm just going to go ahead and log in with root. Again, this is a fresh VM we just set up. And you can just do a character return on these for the most part, and I'll indicate when there's an exception. So I'm going to set password. And yes, we'll use the existing user root. Yep. Okay, we'll put in our host name, IP address, subnet mask, gateway. It'll fill in these with the .1 by default. So if you're fortunate enough to not have typed that in, there you go. Our DNS server, primary or secondary, and domain name. Okay, and accept and continue. SNMP creds for the server. I'll leave these on defaults. And NTP. NTP is important, and there's a lot of records shared between the databases and the devices on the network. So it's important we have the same time across all of our devices. So to do that, I typically like to point them all to the same NTP server. If you're doing a POC in a customer environment, I'll just use their AD servers. Typically has NTP turned on by default. So that's a good thing to use. If you're not, you can use a public facing NTP server like pool.ntp.org. If you're really stuck, what I like to do is you can turn on an NTP server on the wireless controller. So I'll turn on the NTP server on the wireless controller and point everything to it. That way I can ensure that everything's talking. So that's what I'm going to do in this lab, and I happen to know what I'm going to set my wireless controller's IP address to, so I'm going to go ahead and put that in here. Okay, time zone. And it's going to try to reach out to my NTP server, but it will fail because I haven't set it up yet. That's okay. We will do that shortly. All right, we're installing. This can take a little time, so let's just go ahead and move on to our other VMs and get those set up as well. So go back to my virtual machines. We'll go into NAC and start there. And all right, similar process. Root. All right, we had a little trouble with the setup process in NAC, but I'm going to use it as a teaching opportunity to show you some of the commands we can use. So post install / dnet config. And so dnet config we'll use on pretty much all of our appliances. It prefers we use NAC config in the NAC VM, but this will work as well. So it'll take us through that setup process, IP address, subnet mask, DNS, gateway. All right, and it's going to ask for the IP address of our NetSite server, which is the former naming convention of Extreme Management. Used to be called NetSite. SNMP creds, and our time server. Again, I set up the controller as an NTP server. Yeah. So you can also do some of these individually. Post install / date config will allow you to do just the time settings. All right. And SNMP config will allow you to do the SNMP configuration. So we'll finished up with NAC there. We'll do analytics and roll back into our original recording. Cool. All right, let's do analytics real quick. So analytics is a little different, talked about in the previous video. Root. Set a root password. All right, and deployment mode. So there's different deployment modes depending on the customer's environment and the deployment scenario. If you are forced into using a single interface, sometimes you are in a POC, we'll have to create a GRE tunnel and go through that process. Prefer if we could do a mirrored interface so we have a dedicated tap interface for all the mirror in traffic that we're flowing that data through. That way we don't have to worry about any issues with the setting of jumbo frames in the customer's environment, or having to encapsulate that GRE traffic and maybe saturate a single link beyond the capacity to manage the device. So we'll prefer to do a mirrored interface, or selection number 2 there. But we'll just go ahead and do once my home lab, and it'll be a little simpler and a little more predictable. So host name, I'm going to call it analytics. All right. I forget what IP address I wanted on that guy. Let me pull up my little save. Yeah, I wanted 27. Okay. These are defaults. My DNS servers. Beginner.com. All right. So we're not going to import our GRE tunnel information. We'll set this up manually. And we'll just leave this at default for now. Our core flow 2 capable device will be our flow collector. And I haven't decided on the IP address for that guy yet, but we'll just say it's 28. Okay. And we'll come back to that later. Go through our SNMP configuration, NTP, again, our wireless controller, and cool. So that's analytics. We'll go on. All right, let's go ahead and do the wireless controller. This is our V2110. Default creds are admin and ABC123. The OBA shipped with 10.11, which at the time of this recording is fairly old, so we'll go ahead and upgrade that. Character return through that. Sure, I'd like to set a password. How about password? That's a clever one, isn't it? Yes. And sure, we'll change the password for the APs at the same time. Password. Yes. All right, so physical 1. So this is not our management interface, which is more for out-of-band management, if you will, but the actual physical interface that that we'll be sending our traffic through. So set our IP address here. That's our subnet mask. Yeah, so setting your VLAN ID is important if the customer has a management VLAN or something like that, but in my environment, it doesn't really matter. So I'm just going to leave it untagged on 4090 by default. Doesn't really matter. So it's asking if I want to tag the frames. No, I don't. And I want to enable management on that interface, and also AP registration. I want to be able to discover APs. Yes, I like those changes. Would I like change host attributes? Yes, this is DNS related. So, um, let's call it controller. About that. And IP address of the admin port. I'm going to leave this by default because the admin port's, again, out of band management. We're not going to mess with that. Yes, I have a name server. DNS is 192.168.1.1. A little hint on these. Some of these don't like you using a number pad or a D-pad. So you'll have to use the keys across the top. I found that to be true. Probably you've figured that out already if you've gotten this far, right? You have an alternate name server? Sure. Okay. And beheader.com. Configurable default gateway. Sure. And yes. SNMP, yes. And we'll just go ahead and leave these defaults. Again, if this were in a customer environment, you might want to tweak that, but this is just my home lab, so no worries. Time is a little tricky on this guy, so I want to change the time zone and time. So it wants us to select our geography here, and the reason I say it's a little confusing is because these letters in between the dashes are going to be like city names. So if I want to select Chicago, I'm going to select America's B through D. So I'm going to select number 3. And then you'll see Chicago listed as one of the options here, which it looks like is 14. There you go. And no, I will not change time at this point. Run as an NTP client. Yes, I will. And I will just use pool.ntp.org. And nope. Yes, I want it to be an NTP server. Now remember, we're going to use pool.ntp.org for time, and I'm going to have all my devices pointed to this guy as the server locally in case we lose internet access or something like that. We have the ability to synchronize time across all our devices internally. Yes. Okay. Apply settings and exit, character return, and we're done. Sweet.